Before electricity, the world became quiet much earlier than it does now. As the sun lowered itself toward the horizon, people slowly accepted that the day was ending. There was no sudden brightness to replace daylight. There was no switch to flip. Darkness arrived gently, 1 minute at a time. In this earlier world, light was something people prepared for. It was planned, it was respected, it was never wasted. When evening approached, people moved more slowly. They finished their work carefully. Tools were put away. Animals were settled. Doors were closed. The sky grew darker, and shadows stretched across the ground in long, unhurried shapes. Nightfall was not a surprise. It was expected. Without electric light, darkness shaped daily life. People rose with the sun and rested not long after it disappeared. The rhythm of light and dark guided everything, from work to meals to sleep. In these quiet hours, candles became important, not because they were bright, but because they were reliable. Candles did not flood a room with light. They offered just enough. A single flame could push back the darkness slightly. It created a small circle of comfort. Beyond that circle, shadows remained. This was normal. People were used to it. They did not expect more. Homes before electricity were not evenly lit. Light gathered in corners. It rested on tabletops. It flickered against walls. Movement caused shadows to dance slowly, never in a hurry. Candles were usually lit only when needed. Light was valuable. Darkness was familiar. In the early evening, a household might light only one candle. It could be placed in the center of a room or near a task that required careful attention. Sewing, reading, writing, or quiet conversation might happen near that single flame. When the candle burned low, people noticed. They did not ignore it. They adjusted their behavior. Voices became softer. Activities slowed. Sometimes, when the candle was finished, the day was simply over. Sleep followed naturally, without resistance. Before electricity, people did not fight the night. They accepted it. This acceptance shaped how candles were made and used. Because light was precious, the process of creating candles was careful, steady, and repetitive. There was nothing rushed about it. Candle making fit naturally into a world that moved at a slower pace. The materials used for candles came from everyday life. Nothing was wasted. Everything had a purpose. Fat from animals, wax from bees, fibers from plants, all of it was gathered patiently over time. There was no single factory producing millions of candles at once. Instead, candle making happened in homes, workshops, monasteries, and small local businesses. It followed the seasons. It followed availability. It followed routine. In many households, candle making was done once or twice a year. Often it happened in colder months when farm work slowed and people spent more time indoors. The process could take days, sometimes it took weeks. No one hurried. Before the flame ever touched a wick, preparation came first. Materials were collected slowly. Animal fat was saved. Beeswax was cleaned. Fibers were dried. Everything waited its turn. This waiting was normal. Patience was expected. In the quiet world before electric light, people were deeply aware of time. They noticed how long things took. They accepted repetition. The act of making something by hand was not considered inefficient. It was simply the way things were done. Candles reflected this mindset perfectly. They were simple objects, but they carried great importance. A candle allowed a person to extend the day just a little longer. It allowed prayer after sunset. It allowed quiet reading. It allowed safe movement through dark spaces. But even with candles, the night remained powerful. Darkness was never fully defeated. Outside, streets were dim or completely unlit. Travelers carried lanterns or torches. Inside, rooms glowed faintly, often unevenly. The flicker of candlelight was constant. It was gentle.
It was calming. People grew accustomed to it. The flame itself became a familiar companion. Its movement was predictable, but never still. Watching it required no effort. It did not demand attention. It simply existed. In this world, silence was common. Without electronic noise, evenings were filled with small sounds, the crackle of a wick, the soft movement of fabric, the occasional settling of a wooden structure. Candles fit into this quiet environment naturally. They did not interrupt. They did not dominate. Because candles were so important, people learned how to care for them. Wicks were trimmed. Wax was protected from heat. Finished candles were stored carefully to prevent damage. Children learned early that candles were not toys. Fire was useful, but it was also respected. A fallen candle could cause great harm. This knowledge was passed down gently through observation rather than instruction. Candlelight was associated with calm activities, eating slowly, listening, resting. In many homes, evenings were times for storytelling or reflection. Candles created a mood that encouraged quiet behavior. Bright light was not necessary. Comfort came from familiarity. As darkness settled deeper into the night, the candle's flame became more noticeable. Shadows grew longer. The room felt smaller. This narrowing of space signaled rest. Eventually, the candle was extinguished. Sometimes it was blown out, sometimes it was pinched. A thin trail of smoke rose briefly, then disappeared. Darkness returned completely. And that was acceptable. The world before electricity was not afraid of the dark. People trusted that morning would come again. They did not feel the need to keep the night away. Candles were not symbols of progress or technology. They were tools, quietly supporting daily life. Their creation was not glamorous. It was repetitive, slow, and dependable. This is why the history of candle making is so steady and calm. It mirrors the pace of the time in which it existed. There were few sudden changes. Methods evolved gradually. Traditions remained. In the next part, we will begin to look closely at the materials used to make candles before electricity. Animal fats, beeswax, and natural fibers each had their place. Each material required patience and care. But for now, it is enough to sit in this quiet moment. The sun has set. The candle is lit. The world is still.
The simple materials that gave light. In the world before electricity, materials were chosen carefully. Nothing was wasted. Everything had a purpose. Candles were not made from rare or mysterious substances. They were made from what people already had around them. The materials used for candle making came from animals, insects, and plants, all gathered slowly over time. The most common candle material for many centuries was animal fat. This fat was known as tallow. Tallow came from cows, sheep, and goats. When an animal was butchered, its fat was saved rather than discarded. This saving was routine. It was expected. It was part of everyday life. Fat was collected in small amounts. It might be placed in a container and stored until there was enough to use. Over time, these small contributions added up. There was no hurry. Candle making did not require speed. Tallow had to be prepared before it could become a candle. Raw animal fat had an odor and contained impurities. To improve it, people melted the fat slowly over a fire. As it heated, unwanted pieces rose to the surface. These were skimmed away gently. The process was repeated. The fat became cleaner. This melting and skimming might happen more than once. Each time the tallow improved slightly. People understood that better preparation meant better candles. They accepted the time it took. When cooled, tallow hardened into a pale, solid form. It could be stored for months. In this state, it waited patiently until candle making began. Tallow candles were practical, not elegant.
They burned with a steady flame, but they also produced smoke and a noticeable smell. Still, they were affordable and accessible. Most ordinary households relied on tallow candles. They were not perfect, but they were dependable. Because tallow was soft, especially in warm weather, tallow candles sometimes bent or dripped. People were used to this. Candle holders were designed to catch the drips. Nothing was wasted. In contrast to tallow, beeswax was considered a higher quality material. Beeswax came from honeybees, gathered after honey was removed from the hive. The wax was carefully collected and cleaned. Beeswax had a natural golden color. It smelled faintly sweet. When burned, it produced less smoke and a brighter flame. It also burned longer than tallow. Because of this, beeswax candles were more valuable. They were often reserved for special places and special occasions. Churches used beeswax candles during services. Wealthier households preferred them for important rooms. Monasteries relied on them for long hours of prayer. Beeswax was not wasted. Every piece mattered. To prepare beeswax, it was melted slowly, much like tallow. Dirt and debris settled or floated and were removed. The wax was strained and cooled. This process could be repeated several times to improve purity. Once prepared, beeswax could be shaped into candles or stored until needed. Its firmness made it easier to work with than tallow. It held its shape well even in warmer conditions. Still, beeswax was limited by supply. Bees produced only so much wax, and hives had to be cared for. This meant beeswax candles remained more expensive and less common. In some regions, plant-based materials were also used. Certain oils, resins, and waxy substances from plants could be adapted for lighting. These were often used where animal fat was scarce or culturally avoided. Plant fibers played another important role. They became the wicks. A candle's wick was just as important as its fuel. Without a proper wick, a candle would not burn evenly. It might flicker too much or go out entirely. Wicks were made from simple fibers. Cotton, flax, hemp, and other plant materials were twisted or braided together. The goal was to create a wick that could draw melted fat or wax upward steadily. This drawing action was slow and predictable, just like the rest of life. Wicks were often soaked in melted fat or wax before use. This helped them burn more smoothly. Once prepared, they were dried and stored carefully. Making wicks could be done alongside other tasks. People twisted fibers while sitting, talking, or resting. It was quiet work. It required little attention. Children sometimes helped. So did elders. Everything about candle materials reflected patience. Fat collected slowly, wax cleaned repeatedly, fibers twisted by hand. No step demanded urgency. There was also a strong sense of familiarity. People knew these materials well. They came from daily life, from animals cared for and plants grown nearby. Because materials varied, candles varied too. No two batches were exactly the same. Some burned faster, some smoked more. This was accepted without complaint. Perfection was not expected. People adjusted instead. Wicks were trimmed, candles were moved, flame behavior was observed calmly. When materials were scarce, candles were used sparingly. A household might light only one candle and share its glow. Light was communal. This sharing reinforced careful use. Candles were not burned without reason. Before electricity, material limitations shaped habits. People learned to live within those limits. Candles were not symbols of abundance, they were reminders of restraint. Even preparing materials was a quiet activity. Fat melted over low heat, wax cooled slowly, fibers dried naturally. There was no machinery, only hands and time. In this slow preparation, candle making became almost meditative. Repetition calmed the mind. The results were predictable. The process brought order. By the time the materials were ready, there was no rush to begin. Everything waited. The day would come. In the next part, we will move gently into the ancient world. We will see how early civilizations used these same materials, shaping them into simple candles using methods passed down through generations. But for now, the materials rest. The fat is solid. The wax is clean. The wicks are prepared. Nothing needs to happen yet.
Candle making in the ancient world. Long before electricity and long before modern cities, people still needed light after sunset. The ancient world moved slowly, guided by daylight, seasons, and habit. When the sun disappeared, darkness arrived quietly, just as it always had. Ancient civilizations did not rush to solve the problem of darkness. They accepted it. They worked within it. The earliest forms of artificial light were simple. Small fires burned in open spaces. Oil lamps glowed softly in homes and temples. Candles, as we recognize them today, developed gradually and without urgency. In ancient Egypt, light came mostly from oil lamps. These lamps were made of clay or stone. Oil soaked into a wick and burned slowly. Still, simple candle-like objects also existed. They were made from reeds dipped repeatedly in animal fat or beeswax. This dipping process was unhurried. A reed was dipped, it was lifted out, it cooled. Then it was dipped again. Each layer added thickness. There was no exact measurement. People relied on experience rather than precision. When the candle felt right, it was finished. Egyptians valued light for both practical and spiritual reasons. Candles and lamps were used in temples, tombs, and ceremonies. Light symbolized continuity and calm rather than brightness. Nothing about the process was dramatic. It was steady. It was familiar. In ancient Rome, candle use became more common. Romans used tallow candles made from animal fat. These candles were affordable and widely used in homes, streets, and public spaces. Roman candles were often made by hand, using molds or dipping methods. The dipping method was especially common. Wicks were tied to a stick or frame, then lowered into melted tallow again and again. Between each dip, the candles cooled slightly. Time passed. Conversations happened. Silence returned. Roman candle makers understood that rushing caused uneven candles. Slow work produced better results. This understanding was passed down through practice, not written instruction. Candles were important during Roman festivals and rituals. They were also used during travel and in nighttime gatherings. Still, candles were never treated casually. They were used when needed, not simply for comfort. In ancient China, candle making followed a slightly different path. Early Chinese candles were sometimes made from natural waxes derived from insects or plants. These waxes were refined and molded carefully. Chinese candle makers used paper molds and carefully placed wicks. The wax was poured slowly, allowed to cool naturally. The process required attention, but not haste. Candles were often used in religious ceremonies and formal settings. They were symbols of order and balance. The flame was observed quietly. In Japan, early candles were made using plant wax from trees like the sumac. These candles burned slowly and cleanly. The materials were collected seasonally, reflecting the rhythm of nature. Japanese candle making emphasized patience. Wax was gathered in small amounts. It was processed repeatedly to improve quality. Each step was deliberate and calm.
Across ancient cultures, the similarities are more noticeable than the differences. Candles were made slowly. Materials were local. Processes changed very little. No one expected speed. No one expected brightness comparable to daylight. Candles were not meant to replace the sun. They were meant to soften the night. In many ancient homes, only one candle was used in the evening. It might be placed in a central location. Family members gathered nearby. Shadows moved gently along the walls. The flicker of the flame became part of the environment. It did not distract. It did not demand attention. Ancient candle makers worked without machines. They relied on hands, heat, and patience. Melted fat or wax was kept warm over simple fires. Temperatures were judged by feel and experience. If a candle failed, it was adjusted next time. Mistakes were quiet. Learning was gradual. There were no written manuals for candle making. Knowledge was passed through observation. Children watched adults. Apprentices learned by doing. Repetition was the teacher. Candles were often made in groups. Several wicks hung together. Several molds stood in rows. The process was communal and calm. The environment was quiet. Only small sounds filled the space. Because candles were essential, their making became routine rather than special. It was not celebrated. It was not rushed. It was simply part of life. Ancient people did not see candle making as innovation. They saw it as maintenance. It kept life functioning smoothly. It allowed evenings to exist. The tools used were simple and unchanged for centuries. Pots for melting, frames for dipping, containers for cooling. Nothing needed improvement. As civilizations grew, candle making remained much the same. Cities expanded, populations increased. Still, the candle stayed quiet and small. Even in large temples and halls, candlelight was gentle. Darkness remained present. In the ancient world, night was not feared. It was respected. Candles allowed people to move safely and think calmly, but they did not erase the night. This balance between light and dark shaped candle making. The goal was not dominance, but harmony. In the next part, we'll move forward in time to the medieval period. Candle making became more organized. Guilds formed. Workshops developed. Still, the pace remained slow and predictable. For now, the ancient world settles into rest. The flame flickers. Time passes quietly.
As centuries passed, the world changed slowly. Towns grew. Trades became more defined. Still, night arrived the same way it always had. Darkness settled gently, and candles remained an essential part of daily life. In the medieval period, candle making became more organized, but it did not become faster. The pace of work remained steady and predictable. People valued consistency more than efficiency. Candles were made in homes, monasteries, and small workshops. In larger towns, professional candle makers appeared. These artisans often belonged to guilds. A guild was a group of workers who shared knowledge, rules, and traditions. Guilds did not rush innovation. They preserved methods. They valued stability. A medieval candle workshop was a quiet place. Large vats of melted tallow or wax rested over low fires. The air was warm. Movements were careful and repetitive. Candle makers spent many hours doing the same motions. They dipped wicks into melted fat. They lifted them out. They waited. Then they dipped them again. This rhythm continued for hours. Dip, lift, wait, repeat. Each layer added weight and shape. The candle grew slowly, almost unnoticed. There was no sudden transformation, only gradual change.
In some workshops, molds were used. Molds were often made of metal or wood. A wick was placed in the center and melted wax or tallow was poured inside. The mold was set aside to cool. Cooling could not be rushed. If disturbed, the candle might crack or form air pockets, so it waited. While one candle cooled, another was started. Work moved in cycles. Nothing demanded urgency. Tallow candles were the most common in medieval Europe. They were affordable and widely used. However, tallow still produced smoke and odor. For this reason, beeswax candles remained preferred in churches and wealthy homes. Churches used large quantities of beeswax candles. Services, prayers, and rituals often lasted hours. The steady flame of beeswax was valued for its reliability and clean burn. Monasteries became important centers of candle production. Monks worked in silence or quiet conversation. Candle-making fit naturally into their routine of prayer and labor. Silence was not uncomfortable, it was normal. The workday in a candle workshop followed daylight. Fires were lit in the morning. Materials were prepared. As evening approached, work slowed. There was no reason to continue once darkness fell too deeply. Candles were not usually made at night. They were made for the night. Medieval candle makers were familiar with their materials. They knew how tallow behaved in different temperatures. They understood how beeswax responded to heat. This knowledge came from experience rather than theory. Mistakes were accepted. A misshapen candle could still burn. Nothing was thrown away. Scraps of wax were remelted. Broken candles were reused. Drippings were collected. Waste was minimal. In households, candle making often remained a seasonal task. Families gathered materials throughout the year. When enough had been saved, candles were made in batches. This process could take days. It might involve the entire household. There was no rush. Children watched and learned. Elders supervised. The activity became part of memory and routine. During winter, candle use increased. Nights were longer. Darkness arrived earlier. Candles burned for more hours. Because of this, people were especially careful during winter. Candles were spaced thoughtfully. Flames were monitored. The quiet glow filled rooms without overwhelming them. Medieval streets were dim. Some towns used lanterns, but most relied on moonlight and occasional torchlight. Indoors, candlelight remained personal and limited. The flicker of a candle against stone walls created soft, moving shadows. These shadows were familiar. They did not frighten. They signaled safety indoors. Candle making did not change quickly in this period. Centuries passed with little difference in technique. The same dipping frames, the same molds, the same materials. Progress was slow and acceptable. Even as trade expanded and cities grew, candle makers remained grounded in tradition. Innovation was rare and subtle. A slightly improved wick, a better mold, nothing dramatic. The candle remained a quiet object. Its creation reflected the values of the time: patience, routine, care. As the medieval world moved toward early modern times, candle making stayed much the same. It was steady, dependable, and unremarkable. In the next part, we will gently conclude this history by looking at how candles shaped daily life right up until the arrival of electricity. We will see how evenings, sleep, and routines were guided by the simple flame. For now, the workshop grows quiet. The fires are low. The candles cool undisturbed.
For many centuries, candles remained unchanged. They continued to be made by hand, using the same materials and methods passed down quietly through generations. The world around them shifted slowly,
but the candle stayed the same. Evenings before electricity followed a predictable pattern. As daylight faded, people prepared for night. Candles were brought out carefully. Wicks were checked. Flames were lit one by one. There was no hurry. A single candle might serve an entire room. Families gathered close. Light was shared. Shadows rested along the walls and ceilings, moving gently with every small motion. Candles shaped behavior. People spoke softly. Movements were deliberate. Sudden gestures were avoided. Fire required attention, but not fear. The candle flame became a signal. When it burned steadily, the evening continued. When it shortened, the night deepened. Meals in the evening were simple. Food was prepared earlier in the day whenever possible. Cooking by candlelight was done only when necessary. The flame was precious. After eating, people rested. Some mended clothing. Others read or wrote. Many simply sat quietly, letting the day settle. Reading by candlelight was slow. Eyes tired easily. Pages turned gently. Books were not consumed quickly. They were experienced one page at a time. The candle determined the pace. Candles also shaped sleep. When the flame grew small, people noticed. The decision to sleep was not debated. It arrived naturally. The candle was extinguished. Darkness returned. Rest followed. In bedrooms, candles were used briefly. Enough time to undress. Enough time to prepare for sleep. Then the flame was put out. Night sounds filled the silence. Wind, wood settling, distant animals. These sounds were familiar and comforting. Candles were not burned all night. Darkness was trusted. As time moved closer to the modern era, candle production increased. Larger workshops formed. Techniques became slightly more efficient. Still, the fundamental process remained unchanged. Even when gas lighting appeared in some cities, candles remained common. They were reliable. They required no pipes or infrastructure. They were simple. Electricity, when it finally arrived, did not erase candles immediately. People continued to make them out of habit. The flame was familiar. It was comforting. But slowly, electric light replaced the candle's role in daily life. Rooms became bright at the flip of a switch. Darkness was pushed away completely. The night changed. Candle making became less necessary. The long hours of dipping and molding faded from daily routine. What had once been essential became optional. Still, candles did not disappear. They remained in moments of calm. They remained in power outages. They remained in quiet rituals. Today, candles are often associated with relaxation. Their soft light reminds people of slower times, of evenings guided by flame rather than screens. The history of candle making is not dramatic. It is not filled with sudden change. It is steady, quiet, and repetitive. This is what makes it soothing. For thousands of years, people accepted darkness. They prepared for it calmly. They made candles patiently. They used light carefully. There was no urgency. There was no excess. There was only routine. The candle flame, small and steady, reflected the rhythm of life before electricity. It did not demand attention. It did not rush. It simply burned until it was time to stop. And when it stopped, rest followed. This quiet relationship between light and dark shaped sleep, thought, and daily habits for generations. Even now, the gentle glow of a candle carries that memory. The story ends the same way each evening once did. The flame grows smaller. The room grows darker. Everything slows, and sleep comes naturally.